You know what I hate most about people like you? Staff Sergeant Owen Briggs's voice cut through the metallic hum of the maintenance hangar at Fort Carson, Colorado. 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the man already had venom ready. You walk in here thinking you belong, thinking that shiny new transfer means something. He picked up a grease-stained rag from the workbench and tossed it at Riley Grant's feet. The fabric hit the concrete with a wet slap, but all I see is dead weight that's going to get someone killed. Riley stood 3 feet away, arms loose at her sides, face calm as glass. The hangar stretched behind her, cavernous and cold, reeking of hydraulic fluid and burnt metal. 2 Apache helicopters sat like sleeping predators in their maintenance bays, rotors tied down, cowlings open to expose their mechanical guts. Morning light filtered through high windows, slicing the space into columns of gold and shadow. 12 personnel moved through their routines. Crew chiefs, technicians, pilots prepping for the day's training flights. Every single one of them had stopped to watch. Well, Briggs stepped closer, close enough that Riley could smell the coffee on his breath and see the 20-year service patch on his sleeve. Pick it up. Those turbine cowlings on Apache 27 aren't going to clean themselves. He pointed toward the nearest helicopter, where oil streaked the engine housing like old blood. And make it shine. I want to see my reflection when you're done. Riley bent down, picked up the rag, didn't say a word. Her fingers wrapped around the fabric, with a grip that would have told a trained eye everything. Thumb placement precise, pressure distributed exactly right, the kind of hold you learned when every ounce of force mattered. The kind you forgot to hide after 4 years of operating in places that didn't exist on any official map. She walked toward the Apache, boots silent on concrete despite the steel toes. Behind her, Corporal Jared Miles let out a low whistle. Thought they sent us a mechanic, Sarge, not a maid. Laughter rippled through the space, sharp and knowing. Riley didn't turn around, just kept walking, rag in hand, toward a machine that cost $35 million and could reduce a building to rubble in under 60 seconds. She passed a workbench where Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Hale stood reviewing a maintenance checklist, his contractor badge clipped to a belt worn thin by decades. The old man's eyes flicked up, caught the way Riley moved, and something shifted in his expression, a micro change, like watching someone recognize a song they hadn't heard in 30 years. Riley stopped beside the Apache's starboard side, where the General Electric turbine cowling gaped open. Oil had pooled in the seams where the housing met the frame, thick and dark. She set the rag on a nearby cart and reached for a torque wrench hanging from a pegboard. Her hand found the tool without looking, fingers settling into position with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Except maintenance technicians didn't usually grip tools like they were breaching charges. Hale saw it, the way her thumb hooked over the wrench handle, the tension in her forearm, the micro adjustment when she tested the weight. He didn't say anything, just made a small note on his clipboard and went back to his checklist. But his jaw had tightened in a way that suggested he'd just had a very interesting question drop into his morning. Riley set the wrench down and picked up the rag, started wiping oil from the cowling with slow, methodical strokes. The metal was still warm from yesterday's flight operations, heat radiating through her gloves. Somewhere behind her, she heard Miles mutter something to another crew chief, heard the sharp click of a phone camera, felt 14 pairs of eyes cataloging her every movement, waiting for the screw-up they had already decided was coming. She kept cleaning, kept her breathing steady. 4 seconds in through the nose, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold. The rhythm was automatic now, wired so deep into her nervous system that she couldn't stop it even if she tried. Combat breathing. The kind that kept your heart rate below 120 when the world was on fire, and your best friend was bleeding out in your arms, and the extraction bird was still 4 minutes away. Nobody here knew what 4 minutes felt like when it was measured in someone else's pulse. She wiped another section clean, feeling the grime lift under the pressure. Behind her, conversation resumed its normal cadence. Shop talk about rotor maintenance, complaints about last night's duty roster, speculation about whether the weather would hold for afternoon training flights. The attention drifted away from her like water finding a lower level. Good. She worked better when people thought she was invisible. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Riley moved around the cowling with patience that would have bored a surveillance team. She cleaned every inch, checked every seam, ran her fingers along welds that probably hadn't been inspected this thoroughly since the bird rolled off the Boeing assembly line. And while she cleaned, she counted the number of people in the hangar, counted exit points, counted the angles where cameras could see and couldn't see, counted the 3-minute gap in the maintenance log schedule that nobody had mentioned during yesterday's briefing, counted the ways this whole thing could go sideways if she moved too fast. "Grant!" Briggs's voice cracked across the space like a drill sergeant's whistle. "When you're done playing housewife, I need you to move that toolbox up to the rotor platform. 80-pound kit. Think you can handle it?" Riley straightened, set the rag down, and walked to where a black toolbox sat near the hangar's eastern wall. She bent at the knees, not the waist, got her hands under the handles, and lifted. 80 pounds felt like nothing compared to the 150-pound rucksack she'd humped through the Hindu Kush with a fractured rib, and her team's radio after their comms guy took shrapnel. She carried the box across 30 feet of hangar floor, up the mobile platform stairs, and set it down on the maintenance deck beside the Apache's rotor assembly. Didn't grunt, didn't strain, didn't let her breathing pattern change by half a beat. Miles was watching from below, phone still in hand. "Hey, Sarge, you seeing this? Girl's got some muscle." "Muscle doesn't mean brains," Briggs shot back. He'd moved closer to the Apache, arms crossed, face carved from skepticism and 20 years of knowing better. "Grant, since you're up there, tell me what you see wrong with the tail rotor." Riley turned, looked at the rotor assembly. 5 blades, each one precisely balanced, mounted on a hub that connected to the drive system running along the tail boom. She walked around the platform, eyes tracking the surfaces. There, on the trailing edge of the second blade from the top, a stress crack, maybe 4 inches long, spiderwebbing out from a point where metal fatigue had finally won its war against structural integrity. The kind of crack that wouldn't show up on a visual inspection unless you knew exactly what angle to use and what kind of light to shine. She pointed. Second blade, trailing edge, microfracture, 4 inches, propagating from a stress point near the tip weight. Needs replacement before next flight. The hangar went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of routine work, but the breathless kind that comes right before someone throws a punch. Briggs climbed the platform stairs 2 at a time, shouldered past Riley, and bent close to the blade, pulled a flashlight from his belt, shone it at the exact angle Riley had described, and saw the crack staring back at him like an accusation. He straightened slowly, looked at Riley, looked at the crack, looked back at Riley with eyes that had just recalibrated everything they thought it they knew. "How did you—" He stopped, started again. That's a good catch. If you've ever been underestimated, you know what silence sounds like when it finally speaks. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and smash the thanks button to support stories about quiet justice like this one. Because what happens next is going to rewrite everything they thought they knew. Riley climbed down from the platform without acknowledging the compliment, walked back to her station near the cowling she'd been cleaning, picked up a different tool, a socket wrench this time, and started checking torque specs on the access panel bolts. Her movement stayed economical, precise, the kind of efficiency that came from years of working in spaces where wasted motion could get you killed. Nobody taught that in the standard Army maintenance course. You learned it in buildings that smelled like cordite and fear, where every second counted and hesitation was a luxury measured in body bags. Haley had drifted closer, still carrying his clipboard, still pretending to review paperwork. But his position had changed. Now he stood where he could watch Riley's hands while maintaining plausible deniability. He saw her check the first bolt, saw the way she tested resistance before applying force, saw her switch to a different socket when the first one didn't seat properly, making the adjustment without looking at the toolbox, her fingers finding the right size through touch alone. The old contractor's mouth thinned. He'd seen those hands before, not Riley's specifically, but hands that moved like hers. Hands that had learned their trade in places where mistakes came with consequences worse than a bad performance review. He made another note on his clipboard. This time in the margin, where official logs wouldn't see it. 3 letters that meant everything to the men who knew and nothing to everyone else. C. The morning crawled forward. Riley worked through her assigned tasks with the personality of a ghost, present but unobtrusive, completing jobs without fanfare, speaking only when directly addressed. She replaced a hydraulic line on Apache 2.7, torqued it to exact spec, ran a pressure test that came back green. She cleaned weapon system components, reorganized a supply cabinet that hadn't been touched in 3 months, repaired a radio bracket that kept coming loose during flight operations. Every task completed, every standard exceeded, every expectation quietly shattered. And through it all, she listened. Listened to the way Miles and another junior tech talked about last night's basketball game. Listened to Lieutenant Derek Nash brief Captain Aaron Blake on today's training schedule, his voice carrying that particular West Point polish that came with knowing your father graduated in the same class as the base commander. Listen to the hydraulic systems humming, and the ventilation fans cycling, and the small, almost inaudible squeak coming from the tail rotor assembly on Apache 3-1 that nobody else seemed to notice. Listen to the silence where there should have been radio chatter during the 3-minute gap in the camera coverage that happened every morning at 07:30, right when the security system ran its automated backup cycle. By 9 a.m., Riley had worked her way through half of yesterday's punch list. The hangar had settled into its normal rhythm, organized chaos with occasional bursts of profanity when someone stripped a bolt or discovered a part shortage. Nash was reviewing flight plans with Blake near the operations desk. Briggs had disappeared into the parts room to chase down a missing hydraulic pump. Miles was on his phone, probably updating the group chat with more jokes at Riley's expense. And Specialist Travis Dunn, the assistant crew chief who'd been notably absent all morning, walked in through the eastern entrance carrying a styrofoam cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd just won a bet. Riley saw him, saw the way his eyes swept the hangar, cataloging who was where, saw his gaze linger on the Apache 2-7, where she'd been working on the hydraulic system, saw something flicker across his face, calculation maybe, or concern, before he schooled his features back to neutral and headed for his locker. She filed it away, added it to the growing list of details that didn't quite fit the pattern. 3 hours into her shift, Briggs emerged from the parts room empty-handed and radiating frustration. "Nash," he called across the hangar, "we're still waiting on that hydraulic pump for 3-1. ETA?" Nash looked up from his flight plans. Supply said Thursday, maybe Friday if logistics can't get their act together. "Thursday." Briggs said the word like it tasted bad. "We've got a full training schedule and one bird down for maintenance. Someone want to explain to me how that's supposed to work?" "Could always push the training to next week," Miles offered, not looking up from his phone. "Yeah, and we could also explain to the colonel why an entire Apache platoon isn't meeting its flight hour requirements." Briggs ran a hand through his hair, leaving gray strands sticking up at odd angles. "Anyone here remember how to do their job?" Riley set down the panel she'd been inspecting and walked over to the operations desk. "Sergeant Briggs?" Her voice came out even, no inflection, the tone of someone delivering a weather report. "Apache 2-7's hydraulic system is older but compatible. If you pull the pump from there, you can install it in 3-1. 2-7's already grounded for the rotor blade replacement." Briggs turned, stared. "That's..." He paused, clearly running the logistics in his head. "That's actually not a terrible idea." "Nash?" The pilot had stopped mid-sentence, pen hovering over his flight plan. "Did she just solve our parts shortage?" "Looks like it." Briggs's tone carried surprise sharp enough to cut. "Grant, you familiar with Apache hydraulic configurations?" "I've seen the manual," Riley said, which was technically true. She had also spent 6 months working with a joint Army-Navy task force where the helicopter crews taught her enough about combat aviation to make her dangerous. But nobody here needed to know that. Pumps are cross-compatible within the Delta variant line. Same pressure ratings, same mounting points. Nash exchanged a glance with Blake. The captain had been quiet all morning, watching everything with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to trust his instincts more than his expectations. "How long to make the swap, Sergeant?" Briggs calculated. 2 hours if we don't hit any surprises. "Grant, you're with me. Let's see if you know your way around those hydraulic systems as well as you claim." They worked side by side for the next 90 minutes, Briggs calling out steps while Riley executed them with the smooth confidence of someone who'd done this before. She disconnected fuel lines, drained fluid reservoirs, unbolted mounting brackets. Her hands moved without hesitation, finding purchase points and pressure releases like muscle memory. Briggs watched with an expression that slowly evolved from skeptical to grudging to something approaching respect. "Where'd you train?" he asked at one point, genuine curiosity breaking through his earlier hostility. "Different places," Riley answered, non-committal, true. "Learned from people who knew what they were doing." "Must have been good people." Briggs handed her a socket wrench. "Most techs take 6 months to get comfortable with these systems. You're moving like you built the thing." Riley didn't respond, just kept working, kept her face neutral, kept her breathing pattern steady. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. The rhythm was grounding, familiar. It centered her the same way it had centered her the night she'd pulled Daniels out of a burning Humvee while rounds cooked off in the cab, and the fuel tank counted down to an explosion measured in seconds instead of minutes. But here, now, in this clean hangar with its fluorescent lights and OSHA compliance, the breathing was just breathing, nothing more. They finished the installation by 10:30. Briggs ran a pressure test, green across the board. He straightened, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked at Riley with something that might have been the beginning of grudging professional courtesy. "Good work, Grant. Maybe you're not completely useless." High praise, coming from a man who had started the morning by throwing a dirty rag at her feet. Riley nodded once, collected her tools, headed back to her station. Behind her, she heard Briggs briefing Nash on the repair, his voice carrying that particular satisfaction of a problem solved. She heard Miles mutter something about beginner's luck. Heard Dunn ask someone about the hydraulic pump situation, his tone just a shade too casual. And she heard Hale, still standing near his eternal clipboard, make another small note in the margin. Lunch came at noon. Most of the crew filed out to the dining facility, leaving the hangar half empty and quiet. Riley stayed behind, pulling her lunch from her locker, a protein bar and water, nothing that required sitting down or making conversation. She ate standing up, back against the wall near the tool cribs, watching the empty space and thinking about patterns. 17 missing parts in 6 months. High-value components, circuit boards, specialized bolts, targeting system modules. Nothing huge enough to trigger immediate red flags, but collectively representing nearly $400,000 in military hardware. The investigation had been quiet, conducted through NCIS channels that most people didn't even know existed. They'd tracked the parts to a black market supplier operating out of Colorado Springs, but the connection back to the base remained elusive. So they'd sent Riley, given her a maintenance transfer, a thin cover story, and 3 objectives: identify the thief, document the theft method, and maintain her cover until they had enough evidence to prosecute. 6 weeks in, and she had suspicions but nothing concrete. Dunn's irregular schedule, the 3-minute camera gap, the way certain parts went missing only during specific shifts. But suspicion wasn't evidence, and evidence was what the prosecutors needed. So she stayed invisible. Let them underestimate her. Let them think she was just another transfer who couldn't cut it. And while they laughed, she watched, collected data points, built the case one careful observation at a time. The hangar door opened. Dunn walked in, alone, moving with purpose toward the parts cage. Riley stayed still, half hidden by the tool crib, tracking him with peripheral vision. He glanced around, quick, practiced, then pulled out a keycard and swiped it through the shear's cage lock. The mechanism clicked open. He stepped inside, disappeared behind shelving units. Riley's pulse stayed steady, 68 beats per minute, same as always. She watched the parts cage, counting seconds, 30, 45, 60. Dunn emerged carrying nothing visible, but his left cargo pocket sat heavier than it had before. He locked the cage, pocketed the card, and headed back toward the exit. She memorized the timestamp, 12:17 p.m., added it to the mental log she'd been keeping since day one. The afternoon brought more work, more routine, more careful invisibility. Riley rotated through assigned tasks, maintaining her position as competent but unremarkable. She calibrated a torque wrench that had been reading 5% low. She updated maintenance logs with neat, precise handwriting. She helped Torres, the new private who had been getting hazed almost as much as she had, figure out a wiring diagram for a radio system. "Thanks," Torres said quietly, once they were alone near the electronics workbench. "Everyone else just tells me to figure it out myself." Riley nodded, didn't elaborate, but she'd seen the way Miles treated the kid, seen the same casual cruelty that started as jokes and ended with someone broken. So she helped, because Torres reminded her of the cherry lieutenant who'd showed up to her team fresh from officer candidate school and scared out of his mind, and 3 months later had taken a round meant for her and smiled while he bled, because at least she was okay. You helped the new guys, even when it cost you, especially when it cost you. By 1400 hours, the hangar had filled back up with post-lunch personnel. Nash was prepping Apache 3-1 for an afternoon training flight, running through pre-flight checks with Blake supervising. Briggs had Miles and another tech working on routine maintenance for 2-7. Dunn was back at his station, looking relaxed and comfortable, like a man who hadn't just stolen government property 90 minutes earlier. And Riley was checking hydraulic pressure readings on 3-1 when she saw it. A bolt, sitting loose in the hydraulic line housing, not quite threaded home, vibrating slightly from the pressure test Nash was running. The kind of bolt that would hold for maybe an hour of flight time before working itself completely free and turning a hydraulic system into a catastrophic failure at 3,000 feet. Her blood went cold. Not panic, she'd burned through her lifetime allotment of panic in places where it actually mattered, but the sharp, clarifying cold that came with recognizing a line being crossed. This wasn't theft. This was sabotage. This was someone willing to kill an entire crew to cover their tracks, or send a message, or just because they could. She walked toward Nash, moving with deliberate calm. "Lieutenant, you need to see something." He looked up from his checklist, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Grant?" "Hydraulic housing, starboard side. There's a loose bolt that shouldn't be there." Nash's expression said he didn't believe her, but was too professional to ignore a safety call. He walked over, looked where she pointed, saw the bolt, his face drained to chalk white. "Holy cow!" The words came out strangled. He reached for his radio. "Blake, we've got a safety violation on 3-1. Grounding this bird until we figure out what happened." Blake arrived 30 seconds later, took one look at the bolt, and his jaw set into a hard line. Who did the last maintenance on this system? According to the log, Nash checked his tablet. Dunn signed off on it yesterday evening, 1800 hours. All eyes turned toward the assistant crew chief. Dunn had gone very still, face carefully neutral, but Riley saw the micro-expressions, the tightness around his eyes, the way his left hand clenched once, twice, before he forced it to relax. He was calculating, trying to figure out if this was an accident he could explain away or something worse. "I checked that housing," he said, voice steady, convincing. "Torqued every bolt to spec. Someone must have loosened it after I finished." "Who?" Blake's tone had gone quiet. Dangerous. Who had access to this bird between 1800 yesterday and now? Briggs was already pulling the access logs. "Looks like standard night security. No maintenance personnel logged in after Dunn's shift." "Then how did a bolt come loose?" Nash demanded. He was angry now, the kind of anger that came from realizing he had been 45 minutes away from dying. "Bolts don't just unthread themselves. Maybe Grant loosened it." The voice came from Miles, casual and poisonous. "She's been poking around these birds all week, asking questions, acting like she knows everything." Riley felt the room's attention shift, felt the narrative being built in real time. New person, questionable skills, found the problem, but maybe caused it too. She'd seen this pattern before, seen the way people protected their own by attacking the outsider, seen good people die because someone couldn't admit they'd made a mistake. "I found it," she said quietly. "I reported it, that's all." "But you were working on the hydraulic systems this morning," Miles pressed. "You had access. You had opportunity." "She was with me all morning," Briggs cut in. His tone suggested he couldn't believe he was defending her, but facts were facts. "We pulled the pump from 2-7 together. She didn't go near 3-1. "Then who did?" Blake looked around the hangar, his gaze landing on each person in turn. "Because someone put that bolt there, either through incompetence or intent. And I want to know which." The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Riley stood silent, watching faces, reading micro-expressions, cataloging who looked worried and who looked defensive and who looked like they were trying very hard not to look guilty. This was the moment, the point where her cover either held or shattered, where careful weeks of invisible work either paid off or collapsed into nothing. Dunn cleared his throat. "Could have been a quality control issue from the depot. Bolt might have been cross-threaded from the start. I followed procedure, did the torque check, but if the threads were damaged," he spread his hands, the gesture of reasonable explanation. Blake considered that, nodded slowly. "We'll send the bolt to quality assurance. Have them check the threading. In the meantime, 3-1 stays grounded until we do a complete safety inspection. Every bolt, every line, every system." He looked at Riley. "Good catch, Grant. That kind of attention to detail might have saved lives today." The words should have felt like vindication. Instead, they felt like weight being added to a scale that was already dangerously unbalanced. Riley nodded once, accepting the acknowledgement without comment. She saw Dunn's shoulders relax fractionally, saw Miles mouth something to another tech, saw Hale watching the whole scene with eyes that had seen too much to miss anything. And she saw Nash turn back to his tablet, already moving past the crisis because pilots were trained to compartmentalize, and the training schedule waited for no one. But Riley didn't move past it. Couldn't, because loose bolts in hydraulic systems didn't happen by accident, because someone in this hangar had just tried to kill 3 people and walked away with nothing more than a quality control excuse. Because the investigation had just stopped being about theft and become about something darker. She walked back to her station, picked up her tools, and started working on the next task like nothing had happened. But inside, behind the careful mask she'd perfected over 4 years of operating in places where one wrong expression could blow an entire mission, she was recalculating, reassessing, recognizing that the timeline had just accelerated whether she was ready or not. You think you know where this is going? Comment your prediction right now, because what happens next is going to flip everything upside down. The afternoon dragged into evening. Blake ordered a complete safety stand-down, which meant every aircraft in the hangar got inspected, with the kind of paranoid thoroughness usually reserved for post-accident investigations. Riley worked alongside Briggs and 2 other crew chiefs, checking torque specs, verifying hydraulic pressures, examining every system with eyes that had learned to see the invisible. They found 3 more issues. Small things, a frayed wire, a loose connection, a filter that should have been replaced 2 maintenance cycles ago. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that screamed sabotage, but enough to make everyone jumpy. Enough to turn the hangar into a place where trust had become a luxury nobody could afford. By 16:30, most of the crew was tired, irritable, and ready for this day to end. Nash had filed his safety report. Blake had briefed the maintenance officer. Briggs was updating the logbooks with enough angry precision to suggest he was taking this personally. And Riley was finishing a final pressure test on Apache 2-7 when she felt it. The shift in air pressure, the presence of someone standing too close behind her, the particular weight of attention that came from being watched by someone who wanted something. She turned, found Briggs standing 3 feet away, arms crossed, expression caught somewhere between skeptical and curious. "You're good at this," he said. Not a question, an observation that felt like an accusation. "Better than most techs I've seen, better than some crew chiefs." He paused. "Makes me wonder where you really learned your trade." Riley met his eyes, kept her voice level. "I learned from people who knew what they were doing, same as everyone else." "Yeah, but most people don't move like you do. Don't see things like that loose bolt. Don't have hands that—" He stopped, started again. "I've been doing this for 20 years, Grant. I know what normal looks like. You're not it." The moment hung there, balanced on the edge of revelation. Riley could feel the weight of her cover identity pressing down, could feel the careful lies she'd built threatening to crack. But she'd been in worse positions, had held covers under interrogation that made this conversation feel like small talk. "Maybe I'm just better at paying attention," she said. "Maybe everyone else is too comfortable." Briggs studied her. She could see him working through possibilities, trying to reconcile the pieces that didn't fit. "You prior service?" "Maybe." Not a lie, not exactly. "What branch?" "Does it matter?" "It might." His voice had gone quiet, serious. "Because if you're here for a reason other than standard maintenance rotation, I need to know. This is my hangar. These are my birds. These are my people." He stepped closer, close enough that Riley could see the old scar on his jaw and the silver threading through his hair. "So, I'm asking you straight, Grant. What's your story?" Riley held his gaze, thought about the 17 missing parts, thought about the loose bolt that could have killed Nash and his crew, thought about the investigation that was running on borrowed time and borrowed trust. Thought about the 8x10 photo in her locker, her and Daniels and Martinez and the others, smiling in front of a helicopter that didn't exist in any official records, taken on a mission that had never officially happened. "I'm exactly what my transfer papers say I am," she said, "a maintenance tech trying to do her job." Briggs watched her for another 5 seconds, then nodded, slowly, like he'd just decided something. "All right, but Grant, that bolt didn't loosen itself, and whoever put it there is still in this hangar." He turned to go, then looked back. "Watch yourself, because if you see something else, if you find something else wrong," he trailed off. "Some people don't like being watched." He walked away, leaving Riley standing beside the Apache with her tools and her cover story, and the growing weight of knowing that time was running out. The hangar emptied as evening shift arrived. Riley secured her tools, updated her portion of the maintenance log, and headed for her locker. She was pulling off her work gloves when she felt it again. that sense of being observed. She turned, expecting to see Briggs or maybe Hale. Instead, she found Blake. The captain had approached with the quiet competence of someone who'd learned to move carefully, and now he stood 5 feet away with his hands in his flight suit pockets and an expression that suggested he had been waiting for this moment. "Grant," he kept his voice low. "Can we talk? Somewhere private?" Riley's pulse stayed steady. "About what, sir?" "About why a maintenance tech knows hydraulic system configurations better than pilots who've been flying Apaches for 8 years. About how you spotted a crack in a rotor blade that 3 other people had signed off on. About the way you move like someone who's been under fire," he paused. "About why I'm getting the feeling you're not what your transfer papers say you are." This was the moment, the point where careful planning met messy reality. Riley had 3 options: deny everything and hope her cover held, tell him enough to gain an ally, or disappear before the questions got harder. She ran the calculations in less than 2 seconds, weighed risks against benefits, considered exit strategies and backup plans, and the fact that Blake had just identified her better than anyone else in 6 weeks. "Private conversation," she said. "Not here." Blake nodded. "Motor pool, Bay 3, 20 minutes. He walked away before she could respond, moving with purpose but not urgency. Riley watched him go. Felt the careful structure of her cover story developing new cracks. Felt the investigation shifting gears whether she was ready or not. She finished securing her locker, headed out through the hangar's main exit. The sun was setting over Fort Carson, painting the Rocky Mountains in shades of amber and shadow. She walked across the parking area toward the motor pool, counting exits, noting security cameras, running contingencies like rosary beads. Bay 3 was empty when she arrived, just rows of covered vehicles and the smell of diesel and grease. Blake was already there, standing beside a Humvee with his hands still in his pockets. He looked less like a captain and more like someone who just realized he was standing in the middle of something complicated. "Your special operations," he said. No preamble, no build-up, just the conclusion he had reached, presented like a fact waiting for confirmation. "I worked with task force teams in Afghanistan. I know how operators move. I know what they look like when they're trying to blend in." He stepped closer. "So, here's my question. Are you here because of the parts theft or something bigger?" Riley stood silent for 3 seconds, then 4, calculating how much truth she could afford. "If I was," she said carefully, "what would you do about it?" "Depends." Blake's expression was unreadable. "If you're here to catch whoever's been bleeding my maintenance budget dry, I'd say it's about time someone took this seriously. If you're here because someone thinks my crew is involved in something they shouldn't be," he let that hang. "I'm here to find missing parts," Riley said. "That's all. And the loose bolt? Might be connected, might not be. Won't know until I know." Blake processed that, nodded slowly. "You need help?" "I need people to keep treating me like I don't matter. I need the person who's stealing to think they're safe. I need—" She stopped, because headlights had just swept across the motor pool entrance, and a vehicle was pulling in. Not security, not random traffic. A gray sedan with government plates and 2 people in the front seats who carried themselves like they'd come for a specific reason. Blake saw them too. "Friends of yours?" "Not supposed to be." Riley's hand moved toward her pocket, where she kept her phone and her emergency contact card. But the car was already stopping 20 feet away, and the driver's side door was opening, and a woman in business casual was stepping out with credentials in her hand. "Captain Blake, Specialist Grant." The woman's voice carried military precision, wrapped in civilian polish. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen, NCIS. We need to talk, right now." Riley's stomach dropped. Because unscheduled NCIS contact meant the operation had been compromised. Because Chen shouldn't be here unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. Because the investigation she'd been building for 6 weeks had just been blown wide open by a variable she hadn't seen coming. Blake looked at Riley, at Chen, back at Riley. "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" But before anyone could answer, Riley's phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times. The emergency pattern. She pulled it out, saw the message from her handler. Dunn made a run. Package secured but investigation exposed. Extract immediately. And that's when Briggs's voice cracked across the motor pool from the hangar entrance, loud and furious and absolutely done with surprises. "Grant! Blake! We've got another problem!" He was running toward them, face flushed, tablet in his hand. "Someone just accessed the parts cage. Took half the inventory logs. Security footage shows..." He skidded to a stop, seeing Chen, seeing Riley's expression, seeing the way everything had suddenly shifted into something he didn't understand. What the hell is going on? Riley looked at the phone, at Chen, at Blake, at Briggs running toward them with evidence she'd been working for 6 weeks to collect, at the hangar behind him, where 17 missing parts had just become a crisis that wouldn't stay quiet anymore. And in the split second before everything collapsed, she made a choice. She turned back toward the hangar, started walking, not running. Operators didn't run unless they had to, but moving with purpose, with direction, with the cold clarity of someone who just watched their careful plan catch fire and decided to use the flames. "Grant!" Blake called after her. "Where are you going?" She didn't answer, just kept walking, back toward the place where her cover was shredding, where the investigation was blowing open, where someone had just stolen evidence and probably realized they were out of time. She heard footsteps behind her, Blake and Chen and Briggs all moving to follow. Heard Chen calling for backup on her radio. Heard the sound of her own breathing, still steady, still controlled. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. The hangar loomed ahead, lit from within, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Riley reached the entrance, pushed through the personnel door, stepped into a space that had gone predator quiet, the kind of silence that comes right before violence. Dunn stood in the center of the floor, 30 feet away, holding a toolkit that didn't belong to him and wearing the expression of someone who'd just realized the walls were closing in. He saw Riley, saw recognition flare in her eyes, saw the way she moved into the space, not like a maintenance tech anymore, but like something else entirely. "You," he said, voice tight. "You've been watching me, this whole time." Riley didn't respond, just kept walking forward, closing distance, her body language shifting into patterns she'd kept buried for 6 weeks. Behind her, she heard Blake and Chen entering, heard Briggs's confused questions, heard the situation escalating into something none of them could control. Dunn took a step back, then another. His hand moved toward his pocket, not for a weapon, Riley's threat assessment module noted, but for something smaller, something he couldn't afford to lose. His phone, probably, full of communications with buyers and shipping manifests and evidence that would put him away for 20 years. "Stay back," he warned. "I swear I'll—" But Riley was already moving, 3 steps forward, smooth and fast, her left hand coming up to deflect his reaching arm, while her right locked onto his wrist in a control hold that came from years of close-quarters training. She rotated her body, used his momentum against him, brought him down to his knees with a precision that was professional, controlled, and absolutely not something a maintenance technician should know how to do. The toolkit clattered to the concrete. Dunn gasped, trying to twist free, but Riley's grip was unbreakable, her leverage perfect, her technique so clean that Blake actually took a step back in pure shock. "Grant," the captain started, and that's when it happened. Dunn jerked hard, desperate, throwing his weight against her control. The movement was amateur, panicked, but it had force behind it. Riley compensated, shifted her stance, maintained the lock. But in the struggle, his free hand caught the collar of her work jacket, pulled. The fabric was old, worn thin by weeks of heavy use. It caught. It tore. The ripping sound echoed through the hangar like a gunshot. Riley felt the jacket give way, felt cool air hit her shoulder, felt the exact moment when 6 weeks of careful cover evaporated like smoke. Because there, on her upper arm, revealed by the torn fabric, partially visible through the tactical shirt beneath, time seemed to slow. She saw Blake's eyes go wide, saw Briggs's mouth fall open, saw Hale, standing 20 feet away with his eternal clipboard, straight into attention, with military precision that looked reflexive, automatic, the muscle memory of recognition. The hangar lights seemed too bright suddenly, too harsh, illuminating every detail, every line, every truth that Riley had kept hidden behind oil stains and quiet competence, and the assumption that someone this unassuming couldn't possibly be anything more. Chen stepped forward, voice sharp with authority. "Everyone stand down, right now." But nobody moved, because they were all staring at Riley's shoulder, at the patch that shouldn't be there, at the symbol that meant things nobody in this hangar was cleared to know. At the SEAL Trident that had just rewritten every single assumption they'd made. The silence stretched, heavy, thick, broken only by the ventilation system humming, and Dunn's labored breathing, and the distant sound of sirens approaching, because backup was coming, and the whole situation was about to get much, much bigger. Blake found his voice first. "Ma'am," the word came out strangled. "Why didn't you—" Riley cut him off with a look, still holding Dunn, still maintaining perfect control despite the fact her entire operation had just been blown. Because I needed to see who was stealing parts. Her voice came out level, cold, the tone of someone who had made peace with exposure because the mission mattered more than the cover. Now I know. The camera zoomed in on her shoulder, on the torn fabric, on the patch that gleamed in the overhead lights, on Riley's face, expressionless, controlled, giving nothing away except the cold truth that she'd been someone else this entire time, and the screen cut to black. The first person to move was Hale. The old contractor's hand came up in a salute so crisp, so automatic, that it looked like it had been waiting 30 years for this exact moment. His voice carried across the hangar floor with the kind of respect that couldn't be faked. "Ma'am? Navy?" Riley didn't release Dunn, but her eyes flicked to Hale. One nod, barely perceptible. The confirmation hit the space like a shockwave. Blake's radio clattered from his hand. He caught it halfway down, fumbled it, nearly dropped it again. His face had gone through shock and landed somewhere around disbelief mixed with the slow-dawning horror of a man realizing he'd spent 6 weeks watching a ghost move through his hangar. You're actually... He couldn't finish the sentence. "Navy SEAL," Chen supplied, her voice carrying both confirmation and warning. The NCIS agent had her credentials out now, establishing authority in a room that had just lost all sense of normal hierarchy. Specialist Riley Grant, currently assigned to JSOC under classified tasking, and before any of you ask questions you're not cleared for, I suggest you take 3 steps back and let her finish what she's doing. Briggs hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. His tablet hung forgotten in his hand while his brain tried to reconcile 6 weeks of watching Riley clean turbines with the reality of what that patch meant. "You let me. We made you." His voice died, started again. "The whole time you were doing my job," Riley finished. She shifted her weight, adjusted the control hold on Dunn. The specialist had gone completely still, the fight draining out of him as he realized exactly how badly he had miscalculated, which includes making sure people like him don't kill pilots over stolen parts. Nash appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. He took one look at the scene, Riley holding Dunn, the torn jacket, the Trident patch catching light, and his face went white. "That's not possible. You're a maintenance tech. You transferred in from..." He stopped, looked at Chen, at Blake, back at Riley. "This is some kind of mistake." "No mistake, Lieutenant." Hale's voice carried weight earned through decades. "That's the real thing. I served with SEALs in the Gulf. I know what I'm looking at." He moved closer, his gait shifting from contractor shuffle to something more military. The grip on the torque wrench, the breathing pattern, the way she spotted that crack. Should have seen it sooner, but he shook his head. "Ma'am, what unit?" Riley met his eyes, held them. "Can't tell you that." "Fair enough." Hale nodded once. "Can tell you this. Anyone who wears that patch earned it the hard way. Briggs, you owe her more than an apology." The sergeant looked like he'd been punched. "I threw a rag at you. I called you dead weight. I made you clean." He couldn't finish, just stood there with shame and shock, fighting for dominance on his face. "You did exactly what I needed you to do," Riley said. Her tone hadn't changed, still level, still controlled. "Made me invisible, let me watch, let me see who was comfortable enough to make mistakes." She looked down at Dunn, like leaving fingerprints on a phone full of evidence. 2 military police officers burst through the hangar entrance, hands on their sidearms. Chen waved them over. "Secure the suspect. Read him his rights. Everything by the book." She looked at Riley. "You can let him go now. We've got this." Riley released the control hold, stepped back. Let the MPs take over, while Dunn was pulled to his feet and cuffed, Miranda warning echoing through the space like a funeral rite. The specialist kept his eyes down, shoulders slumped, wearing defeat like a second skin. One of the MPs pulled a phone from Dunn's cargo pocket, the evidence he'd been reaching for, and bagged it with practiced efficiency. Blake found his voice, found his command presence. "Someone tell me what's happening, right now, because I'm responsible for this hangar and these people, and I'm about 10 seconds away from filing enough reports to paper the entire Pentagon." Chen pulled out a tablet, swiped through screens. 6 months ago, NCIS opened an investigation into systematic theft of military hardware from Fort Carson. 17 incidents, $400,000 in missing equipment, Parts were traced to a black market supplier in Colorado Springs, but we couldn't identify the source. She gestured toward Riley. 3 months ago, JSOC assigned Specialist Grant to conduct an undercover investigation. Her objective was to identify the thief, document the method, and gather evidence for prosecution. 3 months? Nash looked sick. She's been here for 6 weeks. Took time to build the cover, Chen said. Background, transfer orders, making sure everything looked legitimate. Briggs turned to Riley. His face had shifted from shock to something harder, more complicated. That bolt, the one that would have killed Nash, that was him? He pointed at Dunn. Looks that way. Riley's voice stayed neutral, professional. Found 3 minutes of footage from last night. Shows him accessing 3-1's hydraulic system right before his shift ended. Loosened the bolt enough to work free during flight operations. Why? Blake demanded. Why risk killing someone over parts theft? Because I was getting too close. Riley pulled her phone out, pulled up a file, handed it to Chen. Spent 6 weeks documenting his pattern, times, access points, the 3-minute camera gap during security system backup, the irregular bathroom breaks that lined up with missing inventory, the sudden financial improvements, new watch, paid-off truck loan, down payment on a house. She paused. He knew someone was watching, didn't know who, so he tried to create chaos, force a grounding that would scramble schedules and give him cover to destroy evidence. Dunn's head snapped up. That's not true. I didn't... We found your storage unit, Chen interrupted. Warrant came through 2 hours ago. You've got $80,000 in stolen military parts sitting in a 10x10 in Colorado Springs. Serial numbers match our missing inventory. Text messages on your phone show communications with your buyer dating back 8 months. She stepped closer. You're done, Specialist. The only question now is whether you cooperate or face the maximum. The MPs hauled Dunn toward the exit. He went without resistance, but his eyes found Riley one last time. You could have just asked. Could have come to me directly. And given you time to destroy evidence and run, Riley shook her head. No, I needed you comfortable, needed you to think you were safe. She paused. You made that easy when you decided killing 3 people was an acceptable risk. The doors closed behind them. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Blake, Briggs, Nash, Hale, Torres, Miles. Everyone who had witnessed the last 10 minutes stood frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Finally, Blake moved, took 2 steps toward Riley, stopped at attention. Ma'am, Captain Aaron Blake, 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment. He struggled. We owe you an apology doesn't begin to cover. You owe me nothing, Riley said. You ran your hangar the way you were supposed to, treated everyone according to protocol. Her eyes flicked to Briggs, to Miles. Some more than others, but none of you did anything I didn't expect. Briggs stepped forward. His face had aged a decade in 10 minutes. I was wrong. Everything I said, everything I thought. His voice cracked. You saved Nash's life. You caught a thief that we missed for months. And I treated you like you were worthless. You treated me like someone new who hadn't proven themselves, Riley corrected. That's not wrong. That's realistic. She pulled off her torn jacket, revealing the tactical shirt beneath. The Trident patch sat high on her shoulder, unmistakable now in full light. But it meant I could work without interference, could watch patterns without people knowing I was watching. Torres had moved closer, young face full of questions he wasn't sure he was allowed to ask. The whole time, when you helped me with that wiring diagram, when you found the crack in the rotor blade, you were doing my job, Riley finished. Same as you. But you're a SEAL. The words came out reverent, scared. You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why here? Why maintenance? Chen answered before Riley could. Because catching thieves matters. Because stolen military hardware ends up in the wrong hands. Because $400,000 in missing parts represents capability that our enemies gain and we lose. She looked around the hangar. And because sometimes the most important missions are the ones nobody sees. Nash had been silent, working through his own processing. Now he spoke, voice tight. That bolt would have failed during the training run. We were scheduled for high-altitude maneuvering. 3,000 feet, full hydraulics, combat simulation. He swallowed. If it had come loose... Catastrophic failure, Blake finished. Crash, total loss of crew. He looked at Riley. You saved our lives. I found a loose bolt, Riley said. You called the safety violation. We all did our jobs. No, Hale's voice cut through. We didn't. I saw you moving different from day one. Saw things that didn't add up. But I didn't say anything because... He trailed off, shook his head. Because after 30 years, you learned to mind your own business, even when you shouldn't. Riley met his eyes. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. You saluted when you saw the patch. That was muscle memory. Navy Crew Chief, 86 to 05. Hale straightened. Worked with SEAL Team 5 in the Gulf. Transport operations. Never forgot what those men looked like. What they moved like. He paused. You moved like them. Did my best not to, Riley said. Did good enough to fool everyone else, Hale countered. But not someone who'd seen the real thing. Chen was typing on her tablet, her fingers moving with the efficiency of someone filing reports in real time. Captain Blake, I need formal statements from everyone present. Sergeant Briggs, I need your maintenance logs for the last 6 months. Lieutenant Nash, I need your flight schedule and any communications regarding parts delays or equipment issues. She looked up. This investigation is ongoing. Dunn had a buyer. We need to identify the entire network. Blake nodded, started organizing his people. Briggs pulled up files. Nash grabbed his tablet. The hangar shifted into motion, military efficiency overriding shock. Miles approached Riley cautiously, like she might explode. I posted that picture, the meme. I called you. He couldn't finish. I know what you called me, Riley said. I saw the group chat, saw every message. She waited a beat. Saw you help Torres last Thursday when Briggs wasn't looking. Saw you cover his mistake on the radio install. She paused. You've got potential. Don't waste it on being cruel. Miles looked stunned, nodded, backed away. Riley turned to Chen. The storage unit. What else was in it? Parts, tools, packaging materials. Chen pulled up photos. And a laptop with communications going back 18 months. Looks like Dunn started small, selling surplus to local mechanics. Graduated to military hardware when he realized how much money was involved. Got deeper, got desperate. She swiped to another screen. Gambling debts, $80,000 to 3 different casinos. He was drowning. Doesn't excuse attempted murder, Blake said flatly. No, Chen agreed. It doesn't. Riley moved toward the parts cage, studying the lock mechanism. The 3-minute gap in camera coverage. That was during security system backup, right? Correct, Blake said. Happens every morning at 0730, automated process. Dunn knew the schedule, used it. Riley examined the keycard reader. How many people have access to this cage? 6, Briggs said. Me, Nash, 2 other crew chiefs, and the parts manager. And Dunn had access how? Briggs pulled up records. He shouldn't have. He was removed from the access list 4 months ago after inventory discrepancies. But he still had a card, Riley turned, which means someone gave him one, or he cloned one, or there's a bigger problem than we thought, Chen finished. She was already on her phone. I need forensics on that keycard system, now. The investigation had shifted gears. What had been a 6-week undercover operation had become something larger, more complex. The kind of case that metastasized when you pulled one thread and found 6 others connected. Blake pulled Riley aside, voice low. Why didn't you tell me? When I asked you in the motor pool, you could have brought me in. Could have, Riley agreed. Didn't know if I could trust you. Didn't know if you were involved. Didn't know if telling you would compromise the investigation. She met his eyes. 6 weeks ago, everyone in this hangar was a suspect. And now? Now we know it was done, but we don't know who else. Chen's right. There's a network, a buyer, maybe more people on base. Riley glanced around. So, I'm asking you, Captain, can I trust your crew? Blake followed her gaze, looked at Briggs, still processing shame and shock. At Nash, working through the reality that he'd doubted someone who had saved his life. At Torres and Miles and Hale, and the dozen other personnel who had watched Riley work for 6 weeks without seeing who she really was. Yes, he said finally, I trust them. Then help me finish this, Riley said, because Dunn's arrest is just the beginning. This story isn't over yet, and neither is the fight for justice. If you want to see how this network falls apart and what Riley does next, share this video and subscribe for part 2. Because what's coming next will show you that corruption runs deeper than anyone imagined. Chen coordinated with base security while Blake organized his personnel. The hangar transformed into an impromptu command center, tablets and laptops appearing as people pulled up records and logs and communications. Riley moved through the chaos with quiet purpose. No longer trying to be invisible, her presence shifting from maintenance tech to operator, conducting an active investigation. She found Torres near the electronics workbench. The private looked up, still wearing that expression of confused reverence. "Ma'am, is there anything I can do?" Riley considered him, thought about the way he'd been hazed, the way he'd kept his head down and done his work, the way he'd helped her without being asked. "You kept a video. When Briggs was treating me badly, I saw your phone." Torres went pale. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to." "I know," Riley cut him off. "You were documenting, building evidence in case things went wrong." She paused. "That's good instinct. Keep that phone secure. Chen might need it for the case file." "Yes, ma'am." Torres hesitated. "Can I ask, what was it like, being a SEAL?" Riley looked at him, saw herself 6 years ago, young, eager, convinced that special operations was glory and honor and the kind of purpose that made everything clear. Saw what she'd learned since, the weight, the cost, the friends who didn't come home, and the missions that succeeded but left scars nobody could see. "It was necessary," she said finally, "and harder than anything you can imagine." She started to turn away, stopped. "Torres, that instinct you have to help people, to document things, to see what's wrong and try to fix it, don't lose that. This military needs people like you." She walked away before he could respond. Found Chen coordinating with 2 other NCIS agents who'd arrived as backup. The lead agent looked up. "We're expanding the investigation, running full financial audits on everyone with parts cage access, checking communications, following the money." "How long?" Riley asked. 2 weeks minimum, maybe a month." "And my cover?" Chen shook her head. "Blown. Everyone in this hangar knows who you are now, but..." She pulled up a file on her tablet. "We've got 3 other bases with similar theft patterns. Same MO, same buyer network. We think it's coordinated." Riley studied the map. Fort Hood, Fort Rucker, Naval Air Station Lemoore, 3 dots representing 3 more investigations. 3 more places where someone was stealing capability and selling it to the highest bidder. "You want me on the next one?" "If you're willing," Chen said. "Different cover, different approach, but same mission. Find the thief, document the method, build the case." Riley thought about 6 weeks of being invisible. 6 weeks of cleaning turbines and accepting disrespect and letting people think she was less than what she was. Thought about the way it burned, the way it tested her in places that combat never had. Thought about Dunn's loose bolt and Nash's near death, and the 17 missing parts that represented capability lost. "I'm in," she said. Chen nodded, pulled out a red envelope. "Your orders, classified. Open them when you leave base." She handed it over. "And Riley, good work. What you did here, it mattered." Riley took the envelope, felt the weight of paper and secrets and missions that nobody would ever know about. "It's not finished yet. Dunn had a buyer. We need to find them." "We will," Chen promised. "But that's our job now. Yours is done here." Blake appeared, holding a folder thick with documentation. "I need you to sign these. Official statements, witness verification. Everything needs to go through legal before we can close the case file." He set the papers down, hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you were here. I'm glad you were watching, and I'm sorry we didn't see who you were." "You weren't supposed to," Riley said. She signed the papers without reading them. She knew what they said. That was the whole point. "Still," Blake's voice carried something heavier than apology. "What you endured here, what we put you through, made me better at my job," Riley interrupted. "Taught me patience. Taught me how to see what people show when they think nobody important is watching." She met his eyes. "I learned more in 6 weeks here than I did in 6 months of training. So, thank you." Blake looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to carry the guilt a little longer, but he just nodded and took the signed papers. Briggs approached last. The sergeant looked 10 years older, carrying shame like physical weight. "I don't know how to apologize for what I said, what I did, the way I treated you." "Don't," Riley said. "You treated me like someone who hadn't proven themselves. That's appropriate. That's how it should work." She paused. "But Briggs, pay attention to the next person who transfers in, the next person who seems out of place, because sometimes the people who look weakest are the ones who will surprise you most." Briggs nodded, extended his hand. Riley took it. The handshake lasted 3 seconds. Military brief, professional, correct. but something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or just the recognition that both of them had learned something valuable in 6 weeks of misunderstanding. The hangar began emptying as statements were filed and evidence was secured. Riley collected her gear from her locker. Not much. A change of clothes, her real ID, the tactical equipment she'd kept hidden beneath maintenance uniforms. She changed in the bathroom, trading work clothes for cargo pants and a dark jacket that covered the Trident patch, but couldn't hide what everyone now knew. Hale caught her on the way out. "Where are you headed?" "Can't tell you that." "Fair enough." The old contractor studied her. "I worked with your community for 20 years, transported teams, provided support, never forgot what you people do for the rest of us." He straightened to attention, saluted properly. "Thank you for your service, ma'am. The real kind, the kind nobody sees." Riley returned the salute. "Thank you for seeing what others missed, and for keeping quiet about it. Learned a long time ago that some things are above my pay grade," Hale said, "but I'll sleep better knowing people like you are out there." She walked out through the hangar's main entrance. The sun had set completely now, leaving Fort Carson under a blanket of stars and security lights. 3 Apaches lifted off from the training pad, their rotors cutting through twilight, silhouettes against the dying light. Riley stopped, watched them climb. Her hand rested on the Trident patch through her jacket, a gesture of connection to the machines she'd protected, and the crews who'd never know how close they'd come to dying. She crossed to her vehicle and pulled out the red envelope Chen had given her. Inside, orders for Fort Hood. A new name, a new mission, 6 more weeks of being invisible. Her instructor's words echoed from SEAL training. Real strength wasn't about being loud or recognized. Real strength was having the discipline to do what was right, even when nobody was watching. She started the car. Her phone buzzed. "Good work, Colorado. Fort Hood, expecting you Monday. New package attached. Same rules." Riley deleted the message, pulled onto the highway. Behind her, Fort Carson disappeared into darkness. Ahead, Fort Hood waited with its own secrets and its own thieves. She drove into the night, alone, unseen, carrying the weight of missions that would never be public. But underneath it all, she carried something else, the knowledge that sustained her through 6 weeks of disrespect and doubt. Justice isn't loud, it's patient, and patience always wins.